Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar by Enterprise Support. I have my colleagues Vivek and Randy who will take you through this presentation today. I will also be there in the chat and we will be answering any questions you have through the chat. And at the end of the presentation, we will call out if there are more questions to be answered. I'll hand it over to you, Vivek.
Thanks, Amir. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar brought to you by AWS Enterprise Support. I'm Vivek Singh, Principal Database Specialist in Enterprise Support org at AWS. Today, I will be talking about best practices for securing connections between applications, clients, and databases on Amazon RDS. I'm joined by Randy Young.
Hi, I'm Randy Young. I'm a Senior Product Manager on the RDS platform. I specialize in developer experience. So I do certificates as well as service events and infrastructure as code. Looking forward to talking to you today.
Thanks, Randy. With that, we have a few key points to cover today, including access control and certificate expiry on Amazon RDS. We will walk you through how you can identify the affected RDS instances and how to change the certificate authority on these instances. Just a quick refresher on key value delivered by Amazon RDS to our customers. As compared to a self-managed databases, Amazon RDS automates undifferentiated heavy lifting related to database operations. It includes software installation, patching, high availability, backup, and scaling. That allows our customers to focus their efforts on application optimization and innovating for their businesses. Like other AWS services, Amazon RDS has shared responsibility model. For example, it provides ability to upgrade databases with click of a button on or single API call. But customers are responsible for testing their applications against these new version of databases and performing upgrades. So this was one of the example of shared responsibility model. As a part of shared responsibility model, Amazon RDS offers different mechanisms to secure database access. Now, let's go through best practices where customers can leverage these features. The most basic of security is to restrict access to databases by placing RDS instances in private subnet and disabling publicly accessible flag. It's important so that we can save our databases from the outside of the internet world. So it's important to place your databases in the private subnet. And for connecting to the clients, you can use a Bastion host. For additional security, you can configure RDS instance to accept connections on a non-default TCP port. So in order to safeguard your database, it's important to use the non-default TCP source so that people outside they cannot predict your port on the databases. And you can define security group and network access control list, also called NACL, to restrict from where connections can be made. All relational databases on Amazon RDS support SSL, TLS connections. Certificates are configured when you create an RDS instance. With SSL enabled, all the communication between an application client and databases are encrypted. To safeguard your applications from connecting to an unsecured database server, you can force SSL connections from application clients by using SSL mode parameter in connection properties. So in the connection properties from most of the client, there's a parameter which you can modify and you can force SSL. We will learn more about these parameters in the upcoming slides. Amazon RDS also allows you to enforce SSL only connections using the parameter called rds.forceSSL. You can modify this parameter in the database parameter group. As always, if you create a new custom parameter group and if you want to apply on the database, you need to reboot that database to apply that custom parameter group. If any client attempts a connection without SSL, you can see in this image, that will be rejected. So this is something you can configure on RDS instance by configuring RDS underscore RDS.force SSL parameter in database parameter group. Please remember that you cannot change the parameters on the default parameter group. You need to create a new custom parameter group. Or if you have already a custom parameter group, you need to modify this parameter in that custom parameter group. With that, in addition to securing network traffic, you can also use SSL TLS certificates to validate the database instance. That will help you to safeguard against man-in-the-middle attacks. Every time the client makes a database connection, it's going to authenticate and validate if it's indeed right and trusted server it's going to connect with. So it's one of the best practices to make sure that your database connection authenticate and validates the nature and the trust of the database server. Okay, so now let's talk about certificate authority. Let me hand over to Randy to walk you through key concepts and important dates.
Thanks. SSL certificates on RDS instances are signed by the RDS Root Certificate Authority, also known as the CA. Each AWS region has a separate CA, but there's a regional and a global bundle, which you can use if you're using multiple regions. They also work with every one of the RDS engines that are in that given region. Both the root CA and the database server certificate have an expiration date. Previously, these were co-termed. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But there's also an intermediate cert between these two that complete the trust chain. None of the database, the database certificates should be updated before they expire. Otherwise, you risk connectivity issues to your database. The good news is that most of the new databases do not require a restart. And you can check this using the describe DB engine version API. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later too. The last cycle of expirations of the RDS certificate bundles was in 2020, when the default was changed to the RDS CA 2019, which expires in 2024. Even if you don't use SSL explicitly in your communication, many client libraries by default request SSL communication if the database supports it. And some clients, like the JDBC driver, check for a valid certificate even though they may not be using SSL to communicate. Once the certificate expires, your client may refuse to connect to the database. To avoid these types of issues, you need to go and import the new CA bundle into your application trust store, then modify your database to choose a certificate. Doing it in this order will reduce the switchover time because the bundle includes both the old and new certificates. The RDS supports multiple CAs in the bundle. You can choose one depending on your encryption requirements for your application. The RSA 2048G1 should require the least amount of testing, as the algorithm is the same as the 2019 certificate. It also is now the default in most AWS regions. As we mentioned earlier, the RDS CA 2019 is set to expire in 2024. The actual expiration date depends on the region. Note 17 regions are expiring August 22nd, 2024. And don't be afraid to plan ahead and upgrade early to avoid any sort of disruptions to your service.
Thanks, Randy, for walking us through that. Now let's talk about how we can identify if RDS instance is affected or not. You can select an RDS instance in RDS Management Console and review the details of certificate and expiry from Connectivity and Security tab. With older certificates, for example with RDS CA 2019, the CA and DB certificates were set to same term and expiry. With new certificate authority, the CA expiry is between 40 to 100 years, whereas server certificate on DB instance will expire between 1 to 3 years. Once you move new CA, DB certificate will auto-rotated during maintenance window, and most engine versions don't need restart when certificates are rotated. You can also use AWS CLI to programmatically identify affected instances. Just a reminder, as a best practices, always update your AWS CLI to latest version before doing critical maintenance tasks through AWS CLI. First, you need to use RDS CLI command for described database instances. As you can see on my screen, it's called, you need to run the CLI command AWS RDS describe DB instances. And then, so it will give you the certificate identifier and the details. And then you need to run a new AWS CLI command called describe certificate to know the details of the certificate and the expiry date. Then use, for these set of commands to work as expected, you must have version of AWS CLI of 2.15.62. RDS Management Console has new certificate update view. As you can see on the in the left column, you can see there is a new certificate update view. It offers a single pane of view of affected instances in a given region for an AWS account. You can also use AWS CLI to get the list of affected instances in a region. As you can see that this is the example I have posted on my slide here. As mentioned earlier, it is important to rotate SSL certificates even if you don't explicitly use SSL or TLS settings in connection properties. You can verify it your application uses SSL or TLS connections using engine-specific checks. Let's learn about these checks. In PostgreSQL, you can query pgstat SSL to review list of database connections and their SSL status. You can join that with pgstat activity view to get more details about users, IP address, and so on. This view is available on both RDS for PostgreSQL and Amazon Aurora with PostgreSQL compatibility. As you can see in this example, we got the database name as well as username, setting of SSL, and the client address IP. For RDS MySQL and Aurora MySQL, you can get the same list using performance schema view threads. You can join that with process list to get more details on that. As you can see on my screen, there is a set of example for MySQL. This applies to both of the Aurora as well as RDS MySQL. For SQL Server, you can get that information by using dynamic view called DM exec connections. In the same way, for Oracle, you can validate that information from Oracle listener logs. These different views and mechanism will help you understand if your client and applications making SSL connection with databases or not. There are multiple options in which you can change CA for Amazon RDS instances. Let's learn about those. You can initiate the change from AWS Management Console by clicking on Modify button. You can then scroll to Certificate Authority section and select a CA of your choice and choose to implement the change immediately. For most of the database engines, if you are using latest version, rotating certificate on RDS instance does not require a restart. But Please note that if there are other pending changes from previous modifications on your RDS instance may go through a restart. So please verify if you have any pending maintenance on your RDS or not. You must review the changes before choosing to implement them immediately. You can also initiate the change from the certificate update view. As we discussed that it's on your left-hand column in RDS Management Console with single click. Or you can schedule the change for later time. We have mentioned a few times that whether an instance needs a restart or not for certificate rotation depends on the engine version. You can list the database engine version that needs a restart on certificate rotation by using AWS CLI command describe DB engine versions. Support certificate rotation without start flag indicates if an engine version supports certificate rotation without start. Please make sure that you are on latest version of AWS CLI. One of the example I have posted on my slide here to make sure that if your RDS instance requires a restart or not for rotation. You can also change the certificate for an instance through AWS CLI. As I mentioned on this slide, you need to use the CLI command modify DB instance. Now, let's look at some scenarios. Most modern clients prefer to use SSL connection if server supports, and some will validate if the server has a valid certificate or not. This will do so even if the connection does not use SSL. If you don't update the certificate before it expires, you risk losing connectivity between application and databases. You can see connection failure even after rotating the certificate on RDS instance. That will happen if you don't update the application trust store with new CA. Make sure that you download the latest CA bundle and update your application trust before rotating the certificate on RDS instance. The CA bundle includes both the old and the new certificates to make the switchover as seamless as possible with the least amount of downtime possible. If you use RDS proxy, you don't need to worry about updating root CA. RDS proxy uses AWS Certificate Manager to get latest CA bundle and make database connections. So you don't have to update your application trust store if you are using RDS proxy. You don't need to worry about updating RDS proxy trust store because that uses AWS Certificate Manager. Now, I'm handing over to Randy to walk you through about AWS Health Dashboard.
Thank you. So AWS Health is not just for certificate rotation and RDS. AWS Health is the authoritative data source for events that are and changes that are happening in your entire AWS environment. AWS Health integrates with 200 plus services to provide you with resource health information. AWS Health notifies you of service events, plan changes, and deprecations to help you manage and take action proactively. Sign into your AWS Health dashboard to view your account and the account information. You can also use EventBridge and you get emails for these types of events as well. And if you're on premium support, you can also use the AWS Health API. This is an image of my AWS Health dashboard with the RDS lifecycle event active. Again, AWS Health integrates with over 200 services, so it is the place to go for any sort of planned events. If you configure your orgs, you can get a roll up across all of your organizations, all of your regions, and a single list for burn down. So this data is refreshed every 24 to 48 hours, and you can see the current state of your affected resources. As you remediate the instances, they get checked off the list, And when you remediate all of the instances in your list, you will no longer receive reminders for those events. Here's a list of QR codes for a lot of what we talked about today, and there's useful links in there for this presentation. And now we'll take any unanswered questions from the chat if there are any.
And I would also appreciate if you can please scan the QR code, this one, and please share your feedback survey. That will take around a minute or less. That will help us to do the similar webinars in the future.
There's a question that if the queries, the engine specific, and I'm assuming that you mean engine specific queries that Vivek was showing as examples, even if those queries show that SSL is not being used, is it still possible to face connection issues if certificates are not updated? So the answer is yes. There are some client libraries that will still validate if the server has a valid certificate or not. And in those cases, you will lose connectivity. The best practices and the recommendation that we have shared through this presentation today is ideally you should be using SSL. In a lot of industries, SSL is a requirement as a compliance, and it's also a security best practice. And you should update the CA bundle in your application client or your client's trust store, and then go ahead and rotate the certificate on the database instance. This will make sure that you don't face any connectivity issues.
Regardless of they are using SSL connections or not, they should be updating the certificates.
Now, just want to remind everybody, please plan to rotate your certificates sooner. Don't wait for them to expire. It is a good idea to test them in a non-production environment before you do that in production. If you have any challenges, any questions, reach out to your account team, that is the solution architect from AWS, or the account manager, or the technical account manager from AWS that you work with.
Right.
If you have any critical issues, feel free to raise a support case.
Yes, and if you have any similar topic you want to deliver this kind of the webinar, Samir and I will be happy to see the topic. Please share with your technical account manager, and we would be happy to deliver similar kind of the webinar for those topics. Randy, do you have any closing remarks to say here before we close this webinar?
Nope, just thank you for attending, and reach out to anybody on your support team if you have any questions, and we'll help them out.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm stopping this recording, this session now.